Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you will uncover ancient knowledge that enlightened masters have used for generations to calm the restless mind and find deep, healing peace. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a carefully selected compilation of timeless Zen stories that reveal the lost secrets of inner freedom and true rest. Each story holds a powerful teaching that can transform how you experience worry, stress, overthinking, and the constant search for more. These aren't ordinary stories. They're preserved teachings from awakened masters who understood something most of us have forgotten. That peace isn't found by changing what's around us, but by changing how we see it. As Lao Tzu said, "At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want." Through our time together, you'll discover how these ancient truths can change your life. As we move through these beautiful stories, you'll notice something wonderful beginning to happen. The tight hold of worry will start to loosen. The constant noise of your thoughts will begin to quiet. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a place of deep understanding and peaceful rest. So let yourself settle in completely now. Allow your body to sink into whatever supports you. Take one slow breath with me. And as you breathe out, know that you're about to receive teachings that have been waiting for you across time. Let us now explore a story about the nature of seeking and finding. In the mountains of ancient China, where mist clings to pine trees and streams carve through weathered stone, a young traveling monk arrives at the monastery of Master Zhaozhou. The monk has journeyed for many weeks, his feet dusty from the mountain paths, his heart full of anticipation. He has heard tales of this place, particularly of a magnificent ancient stone bridge that spans the river near the temple grounds. As the monk approaches the monastery gates, he can see the bridge in the distance. It appears ordinary enough, constructed of simple stone and weathered wood, functional rather than ornate. Yet the stories he has heard speak of it as something far more significant, a spiritual marvel, a bridge between the mundane and the sacred. His excitement builds as he imagines the profound teachings he will receive about this legendary structure. Finding Master Zhaozhou sweeping leaves in the courtyard, the monk bows respectfully and speaks with barely contained enthusiasm. "Master, I have traveled far to reach your monastery. I have heard much about your famous stone bridge, spoken of throughout the land as a wonder of spiritual architecture. Can you share with me its deeper meaning?" Zhao Zhu looks up from his sweeping, his weathered face calm and present. Without pause, he replies simply, "It lets donkeys cross over it. It lets horses cross over it." The monk feels a flicker of confusion. This cannot be the teaching he has come so far to receive. Surely the master is speaking metaphorically, preparing him for some deeper revelation. He presses on, his voice betraying a hint of frustration. "Venerable master, I am not asking about its practical function. I seek to understand the bridge itself, its spiritual essence, the profound design that makes it so renowned." Zhaozhou sets down his broom and meets the monk's eager gaze. "It lets donkeys cross. It lets horses cross," he repeats with the same gentle directness. Now the monk's frustration breaks into the open. "But master, it is a famous stone bridge, an ancient marvel spoken of in monasteries across the land. Surely there is more to it than mere utility." Zhaozhou's eyes brighten with a subtle warmth. "Yes, young monk, It is made of stone and wood. It has served travelers for generations. It helps those with heavy burdens reach the other side safely. It stands strong in storms and floods. What more do you need it to be? In that moment, the monk's seeking mind suddenly grows quiet. He has been looking for a grand idea, a hidden secret, a teaching wrapped in symbols and mystery. But Zhao Zhou is pointing directly to reality as it is. The bridge is not a metaphor for something else. Its profound nature lies in its simple, direct, selfless service. It does not distinguish between a noble horse carrying a wealthy merchant or a humble donkey bearing a poor farmer's goods. It simply is what it is, completely and perfectly. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The heart of this lesson lies in our tendency to seek complexity, where simplicity already contains everything we need. We live in a world that convinces us that truth must be elaborate, hidden, requiring special knowledge or sophisticated understanding to access. Why do we so often miss the profound that hides in plain sight? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the seeking mind, a restless quality of consciousness that believes enlightenment must be found somewhere other than where we are. This mind creates endless layers of interpretation, always looking beyond present reality for something more significant, more spiritual, more worthy of our attention. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter bridges, literal and metaphorical, that serve you without fanfare. The morning coffee that awakens your senses, the friend who listens without judgment, the breath that sustains your life moment by moment, the solid ground beneath your feet. These simple realities offer their gifts freely, asking nothing in return, yet we often overlook them while searching for more dramatic forms of meaning. Our conditioning teaches us to value the extraordinary over the ordinary, the complex over the simple, the mysterious over the obvious. We develop what Zen calls discriminating mind, constantly categorizing experiences as sacred or mundane, important or trivial, profound or commonplace. This mental habit creates a veil between us and direct experience, filtering reality through layers of judgment and comparison. The stone bridge in this story represents every simple truth that serves us faithfully while we look elsewhere for wisdom. It embodies what Zen calls suchness, the inherent completeness of each thing exactly as it is. The bridge does not need to symbolize the path to enlightenment. It is the path, offering itself moment by moment to whoever needs to cross. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The everyday mind is the way." This points to the same truth Zhao Zhou reveals. The spiritual path is not found in accumulating special experiences or decoding hidden meanings. It exists in bringing complete attention to the ordinary activities and encounters that fill our days. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." When we truly understand this teaching, we stop asking bridges to be more than bridges. Stop demanding that our circumstances transform into something more spiritual before we can find peace. We discover that the sacred has been hiding in plain sight all along, serving us faithfully while we searched elsewhere. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet of this moment, can you notice the bridges in your own life? Perhaps it's the bed that supports your body, the roof that shelters you, or the simple rhythm of breathing that carries you from one moment to the next. These humble realities offer their gifts without requiring recognition or understanding. As Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The stone bridge shares its strength with every traveler, never diminished by its service. In learning to see the sacred in the simple, we discover that peace was never hidden from us. We simply needed to stop looking beyond what was already here. Our next story reveals the difference between conceptual understanding and direct action. In the halls of Master Guishan Lingyu's monastery, the morning light filters through wooden lattices, casting patterns on the worn floor where generations of monks have walked in meditation. Today, the master faces an important decision. The current head of the monastery, an elderly monk whose wisdom has guided the community for many years, wishes to retire to a hermitage in the mountains. A successor must be chosen. Rather than following traditional methods of selection, examining scholarly achievements or meditation records, Master Guishan decides to present a simple test. He summons all the monks to the main hall, their robes rustling softly as they gather in a circle around him. The atmosphere is expectant, charged with curiosity about what criterion their master will use for such an important choice. Master Guishan reaches into a nearby cabinet and withdraws an ordinary water jug, the kind used daily in the monastery for drinking and washing. He places it carefully on the floor in the center of the circle, its clay surface catching the morning light. The assembled monks look at the simple vessel, wondering what teaching lies hidden within this moment. "Listen carefully," Master Guishan announces, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "Do not call this a water jug. Instead, tell me what it is." The challenge hangs in the air like incense. Several younger monks shift uncomfortably, sensing the weight of the moment but uncertain how to respond. The head monk, confident in his years of study and his reputation for intellectual prowess, steps forward from the circle. His robes are impeccably arranged, his posture dignified with the bearing of one accustomed to scholarly discourse. "Honored Master," he begins, his voice measured and thoughtful, "it cannot be called a piece of wood." His answer demonstrates sophisticated understanding of Zen dialogue techniques, using negation to avoid the forbidden word, while showing his grasp of conceptual frameworks. He has studied the recorded sayings of ancient masters, knows the patterns of Dharma combat, and feels confident in his clever response. Master Guishan listens to the head monk's answer, his expression remaining neutral. He neither nods nor shakes his head, offering no indication of approval or disapproval. The silence stretches, leaving the head monk standing uncertainly as other monks wonder if they should attempt their own responses. From the back of the gathering, near the kitchen entrance, where the scent of cooking rice mingles with sandalwood, comes the sound of footsteps. Yangshan, the monastery's cook, emerges from among the assembled monks. He is younger than the head monk, his robes bearing the practical stains of kitchen work rather than the pristine appearance of scholarly contemplation. His hands show the calluses of chopping vegetables and carrying water. Without speaking a single word, Yangshan walks directly to the water jug. His movement is fluid, purposeful, empty of the hesitation that marks overthinking. In one smooth motion, he gives the jug a gentle kick with his foot, sending it toppling over onto its side. The hollow sound echoes through the hall as the vessel rolls slightly before coming to rest. Having completed this simple action, Yangshan turns and walks back toward the kitchen, not pausing to explain his response or gauge reactions. His movement carries the natural confidence of someone who has acted from direct understanding rather than conceptual knowledge. Master Guishan's face breaks into a broad smile, then genuine laughter fills the hall. "The head monk," he announces to the assembly, "has lost." The words carry no cruelty, only recognition of a teaching moment revealed. Yangshan will serve as the new head of our community. The Buddha once said, "However many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do you if you do not act upon them?" What emerges from this story is our human tendency to live in the realm of concepts rather than direct experience. We become so skilled at talking about reality that we forget how to simply be with it. Why do we so often choose complexity over simplicity, explanation over action? Zen Buddhism identifies what it calls the discriminating intellect, the aspect of mind that constantly categorizes, analyzes, and conceptualizes experience rather than meeting it directly. This intellectual function serves important purposes, but it becomes a barrier when we mistake the map for the territory, words for reality itself. Consider your own daily experience. How often do you find yourself explaining situations rather than addressing them? How frequently do you analyze problems instead of taking the next simple, practical step? We live in a culture that rewards clever explanations, sophisticated theories, and elaborate justifications. Yet wisdom often reveals itself through straightforward action, taken without fanfare or self-consciousness. The head monk's response demonstrates what Zen calls upaya, skillful means, showing technical understanding of non-dualistic thinking. Yet it remains trapped in the conceptual realm, using ideas about non-grasping rather than demonstrating actual non-attachment. Yangshan's kick embodies true understanding because it acts from emptiness rather than thinking about emptiness. Buddhist teacher John Kabat-Zinn reminds us, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." This points to the same understanding Yangshan demonstrates. Rather than analyzing the water jug or developing theories about its nature, he responds to the moment's actual requirements with immediate, appropriate action. The water jug represents every situation in our lives that calls for direct response rather than intellectual processing. A friend in pain needs presence more than analysis. A crying child needs comfort more than explanation. A moment of beauty calls for appreciation rather than description. A practical problem requires action more than discussion. Zen practice develops what might be called responsibility, the capacity to meet life's circumstances with appropriate action arising from clear seeing rather than conceptual understanding. This doesn't mean abandoning thinking altogether, but rather knowing when direct action serves better than mental elaboration. The Buddha taught, "Chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence." Tonight, as you encounter the water jugs in your own life, the simple situations calling for straightforward response, can you act from understanding rather than analysis? Can you trust your intuitive knowing enough to kick over the conceptual barriers that keep you from direct engagement with reality? As the Buddha observed, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Truth reveals itself not through clever words, but through actions aligned with reality. In learning to respond directly to what each moment actually requires, we discover that wisdom was never hidden in complexity. It lives in the simple willingness to meet life exactly as it is. Let us continue our journey with a tale about the nature of true spiritual attainment. In a remote valley where mountains rise like sleeping giants and morning mist dances through pine forests, a small hermitage sits hidden among the trees. For 20 years, a dedicated monk has made this simple hut his world, believing that through solitary meditation and strict discipline, he could achieve perfect detachment from worldly concerns. The monk's daily routine never varies. He rises before dawn, sits in meditation for hours, eats one simple meal, and studies sacred texts until evening. He has trained his mind to remain calm, regardless of external circumstances, cultivated what he believes to be profound equanimity, and achieved states of consciousness that feel transcendent and pure. His reputation for spiritual accomplishment has spread beyond the valley, drawing the attention of the wealthy merchant who has sponsored his retreat. After 2 decades of support, the merchant decides to test whether his investment has produced genuine wisdom or merely spiritual pride disguised as attainment. Rather than visiting the hermitage himself, he sends a young woman known for her beauty and charm, instructing her to present herself as a lost traveler in need of shelter. As evening shadows lengthen across the forest floor, the woman arrives at the monk's hut. Her appearance is lovely, her manner engaging and vulnerable. She approaches the door hesitantly, as if uncertain whether to disturb the holy man within. When the monk emerges to investigate the sound of footsteps, she bows respectfully. "Venerable sir," she says, her voice carrying just the right note of worry. "I have lost my way in these mountains. Darkness is falling, and I am afraid to travel alone at night. Might I rest here until morning? I ask for nothing more than a corner where I might sleep safely." The monk, maintaining his cultivated composure, considers her request. His years of training have prepared him for such tests, and he feels confident in his ability to remain unmoved by any temptation. He agrees to let her stay, gesturing toward a space near the fire where she might rest comfortably. Throughout the evening, the woman skillfully tests his resolve. She speaks eloquently of the world beyond his mountain retreat, describing the joys of music, art, companionship, and celebration that he has renounced. She comments gently on the loneliness that such an isolated life must bring, wondering aloud how any human being could find fulfillment in such austere conditions. Her words are not crude or obviously seductive. Instead, she presents herself as a thoughtful person, genuinely curious about his choices. Someone who admires his dedication while questioning whether such extreme withdrawal serves any beneficial purpose. Her presence fills the small hut with warmth and vitality that contrasts sharply with its usual austere emptiness. Finally, as the fire burns low and shadows dance on the walls, she moves closer to him. With natural grace, she embraces him gently and asks with sincere curiosity, "Right now, in this very moment, what do you feel?" The monk, drawing upon his years of meditation training, responds with perfect stillness. His voice carries no trace of emotion, no hint of being affected by her presence or touch. "An old, withered tree growing on a cold rock," he says, with complete composure. "In the dead of winter, not a single drop of warmth flows through its branches." The woman releases him immediately, steps back, and bows with genuine respect. Without another word, she leaves the hut and disappears into the darkness, returning to the merchant to report exactly what the monk had said. When the merchant hears her account, his reaction is explosive. Rather than praise for his sponsored monk's apparent detachment, he feels outrage. At dawn, he rides furiously to the hermitage and begins gathering dry wood around its walls. 20 years, he shouts, as he sets the hut ablaze. 20 years I have wasted my money supporting a fraud. The flames catch quickly, consuming the simple structure that has been the monk's entire world. Your answer revealed that you still make distinctions between pure and impure, sacred and ordinary, spiritual and worldly. You remain attached to your image of detachment. The merchant's voice carries over the crackling of burning wood. A truly awakened being would have felt natural human warmth toward a fellow traveler, compassion for someone lost and afraid, simple kindness toward another person in need. Instead, you showed me a man so proud of his coldness that he mistakes spiritual bypassing for genuine realization. As the monk stands watching 20 years of his life burn to ashes, the merchant delivers his final teaching. True emptiness is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of unconditional love. Real detachment means being free to respond authentically to each moment, not being frozen in artificial spirituality. You are not a withered tree, and this delusion that you are reveals how far you have drifted from actual understanding. As the Buddha observed, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound confusion that can arise on the spiritual path. The monk in our story had achieved what appeared to be perfect equanimity, yet this very achievement became a trap that separated him from authentic human response. Why do we sometimes mistake emotional numbness for spiritual maturity? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls spiritual bypassing, the unconscious use of spiritual concepts and practices to avoid dealing with psychological and emotional realities. When we suppress natural human responses in the name of detachment, we create a subtle form of aversion disguised as wisdom. True detachment, what Buddhists call upadana-kshaya, is not the elimination of feeling, but freedom from being controlled by our reactions. It means responding to life's circumstances with clarity rather than compulsion, love rather than neediness, wisdom rather than unconscious patterns. The enlightened heart feels everything, but clings to nothing. Consider the difference between authentic equanimity and spiritual bypassing in your own experience. Have you ever used meditation or spiritual concepts to avoid feeling difficult emotions? Have you mistaken emotional shutdown for peaceful acceptance? Real spiritual maturity involves developing the capacity to feel deeply while maintaining inner freedom. The woman in this story represents life itself, appearing at our door with its full complexity of beauty, challenge, joy, and difficulty. She asks the essential question: what do you actually feel when life embraces you? Do you meet it with aliveness and warmth, or do you retreat into concepts about how a spiritual person should respond? Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, the root of suffering is resisting the certainty that no matter what the circumstances, uncertainty is all we truly have. The monk's frozen response reveals his deep resistance to uncertainty, to the natural fluidity of human emotion, to the unpredictable warmth that authentic encounters bring. Zen practice cultivates what might be called dynamic stillness, a quality of presence that remains centered while fully engaging with whatever arises. This is not the stillness of a withered tree, but the aliveness of water, which can be perfectly calm yet instantly responsive to any disturbance. The Buddha taught, just as a mother would protect her only child with her life, even so, let one cultivate a boundless love towards all beings. This instruction points toward the warmth that genuine spiritual development generates. As we release our defensive patterns, natural compassion emerges not as a practice technique, but as the spontaneous expression of an open heart. The fire that destroys the monk's hut represents the fierce love that burns away false spirituality. Sometimes our most cherished spiritual identities must be incinerated before authentic wisdom can emerge. The merchant's anger is actually a form of teaching, revealing the difference between conceptual understanding and embodied realization. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual journey, can you feel the difference between genuine peace and emotional avoidance? Can you sense when your spiritual practices serve your growth versus when they protect you from fully engaging with life? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." True peace is not found in becoming like a withered tree, but in developing a heart so open that it can embrace both the lost traveler and the blazing fire, both human warmth and ultimate emptiness. In learning to feel everything without being overwhelmed by anything, we discover that authentic spirituality makes us more human, not less. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental principle that guides all seeking. In the mountains of Tang Dynasty China, where ancient temples perch like eagles' nests among the clouds, Master Shitu Shichian establishes a new monastery. Word of his direct teaching style spreads quickly through the region, drawing earnest students from distant provinces who hunger for authentic Dharma transmission. On a crisp autumn morning, as leaves spiral down like golden prayers, and the air carries the sharp clarity of high altitudes, a young monk arrives at the monastery gates. His traveling robes are dusty, his straw sandals worn thin from weeks of mountain paths, but his eyes burn with the intensity of someone who has sacrificed everything for spiritual truth. He has left behind family, career, and worldly comfort, believing that in this remote place, he will finally discover the secret that has eluded him throughout years of seeking. The young monk finds Master Shitu sweeping the courtyard, his movements fluid and unhurried despite his advanced years. Bowing deeply with the reverence of one who recognizes a true teacher, the monk speaks with barely contained eagerness. "Master, I have traveled far to study under your guidance. I have read the sutras, practiced meditation in various monasteries, and studied with several teachers, yet still feel lost in confusion. Please, I beg you to share the essential truth. What is the fundamental, most important principle of the Buddha's teaching?" Master Shitu pauses in his sweeping, leaning on the broom handle as he regards the earnest young face before him. His response comes without hesitation, delivered with the same simplicity he might use to comment on the weather. No gaining, no knowing. The monk stares at his new teacher, certain he has misheard, or that this must be the beginning of a longer explanation. The silence stretches between them as falling leaves whisper against stone. When it becomes clear that Shitu considers his answer complete, the monk's confusion erupts into questions. "But Master, surely that cannot be the entire teaching. We practice every day precisely to gain enlightenment. We study diligently to know the Buddha's wisdom. The very reason I have come here is to gain understanding and know the truth. How can you say that the fundamental principle is no gaining, no knowing? Shitu sets down his broom and turns his full attention to the confused monk. His voice remains gentle, carrying the patience of one who has guided countless seekers through this same bewilderment. Young monk, what you truly have was never gained from outside yourself, and what you need to understand cannot be grasped by the intellect alone. The mind that seeks to gain enlightenment is the very mind that obscures your original nature. The intellect that tries to know the ultimate truth becomes the barrier that prevents direct experience of it. The monk's brow furrows as he struggles to comprehend teachings that seem to contradict everything he has believed about the spiritual path. But if we cannot gain anything or know anything, then why practice at all? Why have monasteries and teachings and meditation? Shitu's eyes hold a hint of warmth as he continues. Practice is not about gaining something new, but about releasing what obscures what you already are. Study is not about accumulating knowledge, but about wearing away the concepts that separate you from direct experience. Do you understand? The young monk falls silent, feeling as though the ground beneath his spiritual seeking has suddenly vanished. He had arrived with such certainty about what he needed to accomplish, such clarity about his spiritual goals. Now he finds himself suspended in a space where his most basic assumptions about the path dissolve into question marks. The Buddha understood that, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The deeper teaching here shows us how our very approach to spiritual development can become the greatest obstacle to genuine realization. Why do we struggle so profoundly with this paradox of seeking? Zen Buddhism reveals that the mind which seeks is fundamentally dualistic, always creating separation between seeker and sought, between current experience and imagined future attainment. This seeking mind operates from a basic assumption of inadequacy, believing that peace and fulfillment lie somewhere other than in present moment awareness. Consider the irony embedded in spiritual seeking itself. We practice meditation to become peaceful, not recognizing that the peace we seek is the very awareness in which seeking arises. We study wisdom teachings to become wise, not seeing that the intelligence capable of understanding wisdom is itself the wisdom we seek. We search for our true nature while overlooking that the one who searches is already the truth we're trying to find. This doesn't mean that practice is useless or that study serves no purpose. Rather, it points toward a fundamental shift in our relationship to spiritual development. Instead of practicing to achieve something, we practice to release the illusion that we lack anything essential. Instead of studying to gain knowledge, we study to recognize the limitations of conceptual understanding. Buddhist teacher Adyashanti explains, "The truth is that you already are what you are seeking." This recognition transforms the entire spiritual journey from acquisition to discovery, from becoming to being, from future-oriented striving to present moment recognition. Look deeply at your own spiritual motivation. How much of your practice is driven by the belief that you need to become someone other than who you already are? How often do you treat meditation, study, or other spiritual activities as means to achieve a future state of enlightenment, rather than opportunities to recognize what is already present? The gaining mind creates what Zen calls spiritual materialism, treating insights, experiences, and states of consciousness as possessions to be acquired and maintained. We collect peak experiences like trophies, accumulate teachings like wealth, and measure our progress by how much we've gained rather than how much we've released. The knowing mind creates what might be called conceptual imprisonment, mistaking intellectual understanding for direct realization. We develop sophisticated philosophical frameworks about emptiness while remaining trapped in thought. We memorize teachings about the present moment while living in mental commentary about experience. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind is the path." This points to the same truth Shitu reveals. The awareness reading these words right now, the consciousness present in this very moment, is not a stepping stone to enlightenment, but enlightenment itself, temporarily veiled by the belief that it needs to become something other than what it is. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Tonight, as you notice the tendency to seek something more spiritual than this moment, can you experiment with the radical possibility that what you're looking for is already here? Can you explore what it might feel like to practice not for gaining, but for releasing, not for knowing, but for being? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." The path is not a journey towards some distant destination, but a deepening recognition of what has always been present. In understanding that there is nothing to gain and nothing to know, we discover everything we ever truly needed. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the moment when seeking ends in finding. In a quiet convent nestled among the rolling hills of ancient Japan, where cherry blossoms drift like snow and the sound of temple bells carries on mountain breezes, lives a woman named Chayono. She serves as a humble attendant, performing the countless small tasks that keep the community functioning. While the nuns engage in formal meditation practice and study sacred texts, Chayono washes dishes, tends gardens, and carries water from the well. Despite her lowly position, or perhaps because of it, Chayono harbors a deep longing for spiritual awakening. She listens intently whenever teachings are given, straining to catch fragments of Dharma talks from the kitchen where she prepares meals. Her heart aches with the desire to understand the profound truths the nuns discuss so effortlessly, yet when she approaches the teachers, she is gently turned away. "You are not ready for such deep teachings," they tell her kindly but firmly. "Your mind lacks the education necessary for understanding these subtle concepts. Continue with your work, and perhaps in a future lifetime, you will have the capacity for spiritual practice." These words sting deeply, yet they only intensify Chayono's determination. If formal instruction is denied her, she will create her own practice. After completing her daily duties, when the convent sleeps in peaceful silence, she sits quietly in the kitchen or garden, attempting to meditate as she has observed the nuns doing. She tries to empty her mind, to find the stillness they speak of with such reverence. Years pass this way. Chayono's hair shows streaks of silver. Her hands grow weathered from constant work, yet her spiritual hunger only deepens. She begins to feel the weight of time passing, the painful awareness that decades of longing have brought her no closer to the enlightenment that seems so natural for others. Doubt creeps into her heart like winter frost, whispering that perhaps the teachers are correct about her limitations. 30 years after her spiritual seeking began, On a night when the autumn moon hangs full and brilliant in the clear sky, Chiono performs her final task of the day. She fills an old wooden bucket at the well, preparing to water the garden before dawn. The bucket has served faithfully for many seasons, its bamboo strips and wooden slats held together by nothing more than habit and careful handling. As she walks slowly through the garden, the bucket grows heavy in her hands. She pauses to rest, setting it down gently on the stone path. Looking into the still water, she sees something that stops her breath. There, floating on the dark surface like a perfect jewel, is the complete reflection of the full moon. Every detail is captured with startling clarity, as if the moon itself has descended to rest in her humble bucket. For a moment, Chiono is transfixed by the beauty of this simple miracle. The moon in the sky seems no more real than the moon dancing on the water's surface. Which is the true moon? The question doesn't arise, because in this moment, there is only seeing, only the pure meeting of awareness and reflection. She lifts the bucket to continue her work, but the bamboo strips that have held it together for so many years finally surrender to time and use. With a soft cracking sound, one strip snaps, then another. The bottom of the bucket falls away completely. In an instant, the water rushes out, soaking into the earth, and with it disappears the perfect reflection of the moon. Standing in the garden with the broken pieces of bamboo in her hands, Chiono suddenly experiences what 30 years of seeking could not provide. In the moment when the moon's reflection vanishes, when the water that held it flows away, when nothing remains but emptiness in her hands, all sense of separation dissolves. There is no Chiono reaching for enlightenment, no moon to be grasped, no water to contain reflections. There is only this moment of absolute completion, empty of everything she thought she needed. The words that flow from her lips arise spontaneously, like water finding its natural course. With this and that, I tried to keep the bucket whole, and hoped that way the moon would never go. The bamboo strips gave way, and water flowed. No moon in water now, no water, no. And in my hands, this emptiness complete. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, when you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. This tale unveils the profound paradox that what we seek through spiritual effort can only be found through the complete release of seeking itself. Why do we struggle for decades to achieve what is already our natural condition? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the grasping mind, the tendency to approach even the most sublime truths as objects to be possessed, rather than recognizing that we are the very awareness in which all experience arises and passes away. Chiono's bucket represents the spiritual ego, the construct that believes it can contain enlightenment like water in a vessel. For 30 years, she tried to keep the bucket whole, using various spiritual techniques and efforts to maintain some sense of progress or attainment. Yet true realization only occurred when her container for spiritual achievement completely collapsed. Consider the profound metaphor of the moon's reflection. The moon in the sky represents our original nature, eternal and unchanging, always present whether we see it or not. The reflection in the water represents our attempts to capture this truth through concepts, experiences, or spiritual states. We mistake the reflection for the reality, forgetting that the actual moon was never dependent on being reflected anywhere. Look deeply at your own spiritual journey. how much energy goes into maintaining your spiritual identity, keeping together your sense of progress and achievement. What would happen if you stopped trying to contain or preserve your spiritual experiences and simply allowed them to flow naturally? The broken bucket reveals what Zen calls our original emptiness, not a void that lacks everything, but a fullness so complete that it needs nothing added to it. This emptiness is not the opposite of fullness, but the space in which all experience becomes possible. When Chiono's hands hold only emptiness, they finally hold everything. Buddhist teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." Chiono's breakthrough came not through expertise, but through the complete failure of her expert's mind, the collapse of all her careful spiritual constructions. The bamboo strips that held the bucket together represent our spiritual strategies, the practices and beliefs we use to feel like we're making progress. These serve important purposes for a time, like training wheels on a bicycle. But there comes a moment when they must give way for true freedom to emerge. Notice that Chiono's realization doesn't come through achieving anything new, but through the recognition of what was always already present. The moon was shining whether reflected in water or not. Her true nature was complete whether she felt enlightened or confused. The seeking itself was the only thing that kept her from recognizing what was already here. The Buddha taught, "Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, nothing can help you as much as your own thoughts, disciplined and pure." Tonight, as you release your grip on spiritual attainment, can you sense the moon of your true nature that was never dependent on being captured or contained? Can you feel the relief of letting the bucket break, of allowing your spiritual efforting to cease, of trusting that what you truly are has never been lacking anything? As Buddha observed, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. In learning to hold this emptiness complete, we discover that we were never separate from what we sought. The moon was always shining. We simply needed to stop trying to capture its light. Our next story reveals the subtle poison of habitual negativity and the freedom found in contentment. This is the lesson of the monastery and the monk who never stopped complaining. In a remote mountain monastery known for its strict discipline and profound silence, a community of monks devoted themselves to deep spiritual practice. The monastery followed an ancient vow of silence, understanding that constant talking often distracts the mind from inner contemplation and genuine insight. For years at a time, the monks would practice in complete quiet, finding peace in the absence of unnecessary words. However, this particular monastery had one unusual tradition. Every 10 years, each monk was permitted to speak exactly 2 words to the head monk. This brief allowance acknowledged that sometimes practical concerns or spiritual insights might need to be communicated, while still maintaining the essential discipline of silence that supported their contemplative practice. One young monk entered this monastery with sincere intentions and dedicated himself to the demanding schedule of meditation, work, and study. But from the very beginning, he struggled with dissatisfaction. The simple accommodations felt uncomfortable, the plain food seemed inadequate, and the rigorous schedule challenged his preferences at every turn. After his first 10 years of practice, he went to the head monk for his permitted communication. The elder looked at him with kind, expectant eyes, ready to hear whatever wisdom or insight the decade of silent practice might have produced. "Bed hard," the monk said, using his two precious words to express his primary complaint about the sleeping arrangements. "I see," the head monk replied gently, making note of the comment, but offering no judgment or solution. The monk returned to his silent practice, but his dissatisfaction only seemed to deepen over the next decade. Instead of using the years to cultivate acceptance and inner peace, he spent his time dwelling on various discomforts and inadequacies he perceived in the monastery's provisions. His meditation became increasingly agitated as his mind rehearsed complaints he couldn't voice. When his second opportunity to speak arrived after another 10 years, he again approached the head monk. The elder greeted him with the same patient attention, curious to see how 2 more decades of practice might have influenced the monk's perspective. "Food stinks," the monk declared, using his allocated words to express his ongoing dissatisfaction with the simple vegetarian meals provided by the community. "I see," the head monk responded with unchanged equanimity, observing this second expression of complaint without surprise or criticism. Another 10 years passed, during which the monk's internal negativity continued to grow. Instead of finding freedom through spiritual practice, he had used 3 decades to perfect the art of mental complaining. His silent years were filled not with peace and insight, but with constant internal criticism of his circumstances. When his third opportunity for speech arrived, the monk appeared before the head monk with obvious agitation. 3 decades of accumulated dissatisfaction had finally reached its breaking point. "I quit," he announced emphatically, using his 2 words to express his ultimate decision to abandon the path he had never truly embraced. The head monk looked at him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Well, I can see why," he replied compassionately. "All you've ever done is complain." The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching reveals how the monk's 30 years of practice had actually reinforced the very patterns that caused his suffering rather than dissolving them. Why do we sometimes use spiritual practice to perfect our dissatisfaction rather than transcend it? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to bring our habitual mental patterns into any environment, then blame external circumstances for our internal states. The monk never truly engaged with the practice. He simply endured it while maintaining his resistance. The monastery's conditions weren't the source of the monk's suffering. His attitude toward those conditions was. Countless other monks had found peace, insight, and profound contentment in the exact same circumstances. The difference lay not in what they experienced, but in how they related to their experience. Consider your own patterns of complaint and dissatisfaction. How much of your mental energy goes toward rehearsing grievances about circumstances you cannot change? The monk spent 30 years of precious life focused on bed hardness and food quality, instead of using those same years to develop inner freedom. This story also reveals the cumulative power of our mental habits. Each day, the monk chose complaint over acceptance. He strengthened neural pathways of dissatisfaction. Over 3 decades, these patterns became so ingrained that leaving seemed like the only option, when in reality, changing his perspective had always been available. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The monk's tragedy was his failure to recognize that his dissatisfaction was impermanent and changeable. Instead of working with his resistance, he fed it daily for 30 years until it consumed his entire spiritual journey. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The monk's 6 words over 30 years, all complaints, brought no peace to himself or others. Meanwhile, monks who used their practice to cultivate gratitude and acceptance found profound tranquility in the same conditions. Look deeply at your own relationship with current challenges. Where are you spending years complaining about circumstances that could be transformed through a shift in perspective? What would change if you used the same mental energy currently devoted to dissatisfaction to cultivate acceptance and inner peace? Tonight, as you notice the inevitable discomforts and imperfections of daily life, can you remember the monk's wasted decades? Can you choose gratitude over complaint, acceptance over resistance, understanding that your response to circumstances shapes your experience far more than the circumstances themselves? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The monastery offered every monk the same opportunity for peace and awakening. Some found it, others did not. Not because of external conditions, but because of the quality of attention they brought to those conditions. In every moment, we face the same choice the monk faced daily: to practice complaining or to practice contentment. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walked slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. "That was strange," he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate: fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
"This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real."
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong? The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. Monk, do you know what your problem is? The master asked kindly. Your problem is that you are worse than a clown. The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer? The master smiled warmly and explained, a clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown? At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, But in the expert's mind, there are few. The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The Master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The Master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master, renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. How does it taste? The master asked. Much fresher, the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. Clean and pure. Do you taste the salt? The master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. No, he said slowly. I don't taste any salt at all. The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. My dear student, the master said, the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into. The apprentice listened with new understanding. When you are in pain, the master continued, the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses. Or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things, to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater. The master paused. Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake. The Buddha once said, pain is certain, suffering is optional. This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us. What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous, or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single, painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about perception's power to create reality. This is the tale of the eggplant in the dark. In a mountain monastery where silence was treasured, there lived a monk renowned for strict adherence to Buddhist precepts. His devotion was unwavering, his meditation exemplary, his commitment to non-violence absolute. For years, he had walked the path with careful attention to every rule, finding comfort in structure and certainty. One moonless night, returning from evening meditation, he walked slowly along the garden path to his quarters. The darkness was complete, broken only by faint outlines of familiar landmarks. He knew this path intimately, yet tonight something felt different. Suddenly, his foot came down on something soft and yielding. The object made a distinct squishing sound that pierced the quiet like a bell. The monk froze, his heart racing as his mind conjured the most likely explanation. He had stepped on an egg-bearing frog. The realization struck like a physical blow. The first precept forbids taking life, and here he was, a dedicated practitioner, having just killed a pregnant creature. Not only had he taken one life, but potentially dozens. Horror washed over him in waves. His hands trembled as he knelt in darkness, trying to determine what happened, but the night was too black to see. His mind spun with questions and recriminations. How could he have been so careless? Was this a spiritual test he had failed catastrophically? Sleep became impossible. When he finally lay down, his mind churned with guilt and self-doubt. In his dreams, hundreds of frogs appeared, their eyes accusatory, demanding justice for their fallen mother and unborn siblings. They surrounded him, voices rising in condemnation that echoed through his consciousness. The monk woke repeatedly, each time remembering anew what he believed he had done. His carefully cultivated peace was shattered, replaced by torment that grew stronger with each passing hour. He questioned not only this moment, but his entire spiritual practice. As dawn broke, painting the monastery gardens in soft golden light, the monk returned to face the reality of his actions. His steps were heavy with dread as he approached the familiar path. But when morning light revealed the truth, the monk stopped in complete astonishment. There lay not the remains of a frog, but an overripe eggplant that had fallen from the monastery garden. The purple vegetable had split open when he stepped on it, creating the squishing sound that triggered his night of anguish. In that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened. The monk felt a sudden shift in understanding that went far beyond relief. For the first time in years of study, he truly grasped the teaching that there is no objective world. His entire night of suffering had been created not by external reality, but by his mind's interpretation of an ambiguous experience. Standing in the garden, looking at the harmless eggplant, the monk finally understood how to practice Zen. It wasn't about perfect adherence to rules or avoiding all error. It was about seeing clearly, without the distortions of assumption and mental elaboration. The Buddha once said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching captures what the monk discovered. Our experience of reality is largely created by mental interpretations rather than objective circumstances. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully perceptions shape emotional reality. The monk's actual experience was minimal, stepping on something soft in darkness. Everything that followed was generated entirely by his mind's interpretation of that simple sensory event. Why do we construct elaborate stories from incomplete information? Our minds evolved to make rapid assessments for survival, often filling gaps with worst-case scenarios. This mental habit served our ancestors well when danger was immediate and physical, but creates unnecessary suffering when applied to modern psychological situations. Consider how often you step on metaphorical eggplants in the dark. Your friend doesn't return your text immediately, and you assume you've offended them. A colleague seems distant in a meeting, and you convince yourself they're angry about your presentation. Your partner comes home quieter than usual, and you imagine relationship problems that may exist only in your worried mind. Each scenario follows the same pattern: ambiguous sensory input, followed by mental interpretation, followed by emotional reaction to the interpretation rather than the actual event. We suffer not from what happens, but from what we think about what happens. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The monk had become an expert in following rules, but a beginner in seeing clearly. His expertise actually became a limitation when it caused him to jump to conclusions based on preconceptions. This story invites us to examine our tendency toward premature interpretation. How often do we create our own nightmares by assuming the worst about ambiguous situations? How much daily stress comes from responding to imagined scenarios rather than actual circumstances? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable ambiguities of human interaction, can you remember the monk and the eggplant? When your mind begins constructing stories about unclear situations, can you step back and ask, what do I actually know for certain, and what am I adding through interpretation? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, doubt everything, find your own light. The monk's awakening came not from following external rules more perfectly, but from discovering the clarity that was always available within him. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions, his dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His technique became flawless, his aim so precise that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning archery contests one after another, each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flush with success, and perhaps a bit intoxicated by his own reputation, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man renowned not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. I will challenge this old master, the young man thought, and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land. He found the master's simple dwelling and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to demonstrate whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet amusement, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his demonstration. He selected a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practiced precision, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without pausing, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have accomplished it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, gesturing toward his perfect demonstration. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly, "let us find a more suitable place for this demonstration." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no location could diminish his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more treacherous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep chasm. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow, the chasm yawned like a hungry mouth. The slightest misstep would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this precarious bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it sagged slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the chasm. Drawing his bow with the same casual precision he might use in his own garden, the master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the void and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but accomplished under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and gestured toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the seemingly bottomless abyss. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs trembled beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with compassionate understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between mastery of technique and mastery of the mind that employs the technique. Why do we so often mistake technical proficiency for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on external accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limitations when facing uncertainty, danger, or genuine challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully cultivated abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on external circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of expertise. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, Do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's demonstration wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the profound difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine equanimity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on precipices. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and competencies you've developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Life is the bridge over the chasm, uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our equilibrium, no matter where we find ourselves standing. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the Venerable Abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation. but those familiar with Cao Chou's teaching style recognize the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Cao Chou reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Cao Chou stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao Chou calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Chou's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of seeking and finding. This is the master sculptor's discovery. In a bustling stone quarry beneath towering mountains, a master sculptor moved among the marble blocks with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades coaxing beauty from stone. The morning sun cast golden light across the quarry, illuminating countless blocks that seemed to whisper their stories to him. "Aha!" he would say, running his weathered hands across smooth surfaces. "There is a heroic figure locked in that piece, and a saint trapped inside that other one." His reputation had grown precisely because of this gift, his ability to sense what he called the suchness of every stone, to see beyond raw material to its true nature waiting to be released. But on this morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For over 40 years, he had been searching for something special, the perfect block from which he could create his masterwork, a glorious statue of the Buddha. His energies were waning now, and still this elusive Buddha block remained hidden from him. He had traveled to great quarries around the world, consulted experts, hired specialists to scour remote areas, yet nowhere could he find that one perfect slab that would allow him to release the most perfect likeness of Buddha. Feeling the weight of his lifelong quest, the sculptor sought consolation from a local Zen priest, who headed a small temple at the end of his street. The temple was modest, with a peaceful courtyard where a stone well sat, surrounded by carefully tended moss. "Master," the sculptor said, bowing deeply, "I have searched for 40 years for the perfect stone from which to carve the Buddha. My life's work remains incomplete." The priest listened with kind eyes, then smiled gently. "No problem," he said with such simplicity that the sculptor felt both confused and hopeful. "Do you mean you can tell me where I might find the perfect material from which I can release the Buddha of my dreams?" the sculptor asked, excitement rising in his voice. "Of course." "Where?" The priest raised his hand and pointed across the courtyard. "Over there," he said, indicating the stone well. The excited sculptor hurried to the well and peered down into the still, dark water. There, looking back at him with the same questioning eyes, the same lined face marked by years of searching, was his own reflection. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The deeper teaching here shows us that what we seek most desperately often lies not in some distant place or perfect circumstance, but in the very ground of our own being. Why do we exhaust ourselves searching everywhere except within? Zen Buddhism reveals that we become so focused on the object of our search that we forget to examine the searcher. The sculptor had examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, yet never considered that the very consciousness doing the seeking was itself the perfect material for awakening. Consider how often throughout your day you postpone contentment, waiting for better circumstances. "I'll be happy when I get the promotion, find the right partner, when conditions are finally perfect." This is seeking the Buddha block everywhere, except in the reflection looking back at us right now. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The sculptor's profound realization wasn't that he needed to become something different, but that he needed to recognize what he already was. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature isn't found in external circumstances, but in the awareness that recognizes, seeks, and creates. The well represents the still point within consciousness, where seeking ends and finding begins. When we stop looking outward and peer into the depths of our own awareness, we discover that the one who seeks and the sought are the same. In Zen practice, we speak of original face, the essential nature that exists before conditioning. This original face isn't hidden in some special place. It's looking back at us from every mirror, every moment of genuine presence. Tonight, as you encounter the reflection of your own seeking mind, can you recognize the Buddha nature that has been with you all along? Perhaps it appears in your capacity for wonder, your longing for truth, or simply in the awareness that notices these very words. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The masterwork you've been seeking isn't waiting for perfect materials. It's waiting for the recognition that the artist, the art, and the awareness that appreciates beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the phantoms we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years, their love deep and genuine, their companionship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grasped her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you. and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her impending departure, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided social gatherings, declined invitations, and turned away from any possibility of female companionship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Conversations led to friendship. Friendship deepened into affection. And eventually, despite his guilt and internal conflict, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears materialized. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the unmistakable figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance. It was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him, recounting in perfect detail everything that had transpired between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, reveal their most intimate exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so intense that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes, his hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and exhaustion. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "my dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his account, the master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure materialized, the man followed the master's instructions precisely. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the apparition. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked uncertain, even confused. I cannot," she stammered, and then, Like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unresolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external forces, but from the phantoms we create through our own psychological patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and conditioning, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Consider how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken or standards you've failed to meet. These internalized critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners, but their power comes entirely from our own minds giving them substance. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no independent existence. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his conditioning told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her psychologically present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the phantom's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or psychological projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true, they're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's accusations felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know. What others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their validity, to challenge their authority over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these internal critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief, the moment we see them for what they truly are, not supernatural visitations, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals how deeply our ego can hide, even from ourselves. This is the story of the Prime Minister's lesson. In the grand capital of the Tang dynasty, where golden palaces rose toward heaven and scholars debated philosophy in moonlit gardens, there lived a man of extraordinary accomplishments. The Prime Minister had earned his position through brilliance in both statecraft and military strategy, defending the empire from invaders while crafting policies that brought prosperity to millions. His name was spoken with reverence throughout the land, and his counsel was sought by the emperor himself. Yet despite his worldly success, the Prime Minister considered himself a humble student of the Buddha's teachings. Each week, he would leave behind the silk robes and ceremonial duties of his office, donning simple clothes to visit his beloved Zen master in a modest temple on the outskirts of the city. There, surrounded by weathered wooden beams and the gentle sound of wind chimes, he would sit in meditation and receive instruction like any other sincere seeker. The relationship between the two men appeared beautifully balanced. The master treated his distinguished student with neither special deference nor dismissal, and the Prime Minister seemed to approach his teacher with genuine humility and respect. To observers, it appeared that political rank had no bearing on their spiritual connection, simply a wise teacher guiding an earnest student along the path of awakening. On one particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the temple windows, the Prime Minister settled into his usual position before his master. After their customary meditation, he posed a question that had been troubling him. "Your Reverence," he began with careful formality, "I have been contemplating the nature of spiritual obstacles. Could you please explain what egotism means according to Buddhist teaching?" The transformation in the master's demeanor was startling and immediate. His face flushed deep red, his eyes flashed with apparent anger, and in a voice dripping with condescension and contempt, he snapped back harshly. "What kind of stupid question is that? Have you learned nothing in all your visits here?" The Prime Minister recoiled as if physically struck. Never had his teacher spoken to him with such disrespect. His own face grew hot with indignation. How dare this simple monk, who had never governed provinces or led armies, speak to him in such a manner? Did he not understand to whom he was speaking? The Prime Minister's jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and his entire body bristled with wounded pride and rising fury. Then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, the master's expression softened into a gentle smile. His voice returned to its usual warm, patient tone as he said quietly, "This, Your Excellency, is egotism." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the ego is a veil between humans and God. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the subtlety and persistence of our false sense of self. Even when we believe we have cultivated humility, the ego remains, waiting for the right trigger to reveal its hidden presence. Why do we struggle to see our own egotism? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego is like our own shadow, always present but rarely noticed because we're looking in the wrong direction. The ego is particularly clever at disguising itself in spiritual clothing. We can practice meditation for years, study sacred texts, and even develop genuine compassion, all while maintaining a subtle sense of spiritual superiority or specialness. The Prime Minister's ego wasn't obvious in his daily spiritual practice. He appeared humble, respectful, and sincere. But when his dignity was challenged, when his sense of status and importance was threatened, the ego erupted with full force. This is the ego's signature. It reveals itself not in our calm moments, but in our reactive ones. Consider how often throughout your day you might experience similar moments. A colleague interrupts you during a meeting, and irritation flashes through your mind. A driver cuts you off in traffic, and anger arises. Someone questions your expertise in an area you consider your specialty, and defensiveness emerges. These automatic reactions reveal the ego's constant vigilance, always ready to defend its constructed image of who we think we are. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of working with ego. We must simultaneously accept ourselves completely while remaining willing to see through our self-deceptions. The ego thrives on both self-hatred and self-aggrandizement, but it dissolves in the light of honest, compassionate self-observation. The master's skillful teaching method reveals another crucial insight. Sometimes the most effective spiritual instruction comes not through gentle guidance, but through direct confrontation with our unconscious patterns. The shock of having his dignity challenged in such an unexpected way created a moment of clarity for the Prime Minister. A sudden recognition of patterns that had been operating below the surface of his awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called ego transparency, the ability to see through our self-protective mechanisms as they arise. This doesn't mean we eliminate the ego entirely, which would be neither possible nor desirable, but rather that we develop a lighter relationship with it. We learn to recognize its voice without automatically believing its stories. Tonight, as you notice moments of defensiveness, irritation, or wounded pride arising in your interactions, can you remember the Prime Minister's lesson? Can you see these reactions not as character flaws, but as opportunities for deeper self-understanding? As the Buddha taught, you only lose what you cling to. The ego is simply another thing we cling to, a collection of stories about who we think we are. In releasing our grip on these stories, we discover the freedom that lies beyond the prison of self-importance. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story reveals the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a distant monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated practitioners who had taken strict vows as part of their spiritual training, including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual development. As they approached a swollen river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they encountered a young woman standing uncertainly at the water's edge. The current was strong and treacherous, filled with debris from the mountain runoff, and she was clearly afraid to attempt crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them, "could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their monastic rules and the potential complications of this situation. Physical contact with women was explicitly forbidden, and he began formulating explanations for why they couldn't help, perhaps suggestions for alternative solutions that wouldn't require breaking their vows. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's predicament and the genuine danger she faced, and made a different choice. Without hesitation or lengthy deliberation, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the treacherous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey, but the atmosphere between them had changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly agitated silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had witnessed. As the hours passed, his internal tension grew until finally he could no longer contain his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer, "I cannot understand your behavior back at the river. Our spiritual training explicitly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so blatantly violate our sacred vows?" His companion looked at him with gentle surprise and responded with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her." Buddha's wisdom teaches us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound difference between compassionate action and mental attachment, between responding to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, replaying scenarios and nursing grievances that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they've passed. The first monk's agitation demonstrates how rigid adherence to rules can sometimes conflict with the compassionate spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and responded with immediate kindness, then completely released the incident. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own tendency to replay past conversations, nurse old grievances, or mentally rehearse scenarios that have already ended. How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than dramatic violations of rules. We carry harsh words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with possibility and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the incident endlessly in his mind. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing was impermanent. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monk's attachment to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The irony is profound. The monk who actually broke the rule experienced no suffering from it, while the monk who maintained perfect rule observance created hours of agitation for himself. This reveals that suffering often comes not from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old grievances, or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the burden of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn? The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. And even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the two towns. In a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, a wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, two different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. "It was dreadful," he said with obvious bitterness. "Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate, the shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore." The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. "This town is very much the same," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea stall. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said cheerfully. "What's it like?" The master regarded this second visitor with the same careful attention he had given the first, again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. "What was your old town like?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. "It was wonderful," he said with obvious fondness. "Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name. And there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities." The master smiled knowingly. "This town is very much the same," he told the second man. "I think you will like it here very much." The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here, we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences, not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere. The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter, or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are." We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often, when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstances we encounter. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the paradox of absolute truth. This is the lesson of the hermit and the contradictory teaching. A renowned Zen master had gained a reputation throughout the region for his profound insights and transformative teachings. Students came from far and wide to study under his guidance, each hoping to receive the wisdom that would lead them to enlightenment. Among all his teachings, there was one that he considered his greatest and most fundamental insight. Buddha is your own mind, the master would tell his students with absolute conviction. This is the highest truth I can share with you, Stop looking outside yourself for what you already possess. Stop seeking in temples and books what is already present in your own consciousness. Buddha is your own mind. Realize this, and you will be free. One young monk was so deeply moved by this teaching that it seemed to illuminate everything he had been searching for. The idea that enlightenment wasn't something to be acquired from external sources, but was actually the very nature of his own mind, struck him as the most profound truth he had ever encountered. This insight felt so complete and revolutionary that he decided it deserved his total dedication. Leaving the monastery and his fellow students behind, the monk retreated deep into the wilderness to meditate on this great teaching. He found a remote cave in the mountains where he could practice without any distractions or influences from the outside world. There, surrounded by the silence of nature, he spent 20 years in solitary contemplation, probing every aspect of the master's words. During those 2 decades of hermitage, he explored the teaching from every possible angle. He meditated on the nature of mind, examined his own consciousness, and worked to fully realize the truth that Buddha was indeed his own mind. The years passed in deep practice as he sought to embody this understanding completely. One day, a traveling monk happened to pass through the forest near his cave. The hermit, excited to meet another practitioner after so many years of solitude, emerged from his retreat to greet the visitor. Through their conversation, he learned that this traveler had also studied under the same renowned master. "How wonderful to meet a fellow student," the hermit exclaimed. "Please, tell me what you know of our master's greatest teaching. I have spent 20 years contemplating his profound insight that Buddha is your own mind." The traveling monk's eyes lit up with recognition, but his response was entirely unexpected. "Ah, yes, the master has indeed been very clear about this subject," he said enthusiastically. "His greatest teaching, the one he emphasizes above all others, is this: Buddha is not your own mind." The hermit stood speechless, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. After 20 years of dedicated practice based on what he believed was the master's highest teaching, he was now hearing the exact opposite presented with equal conviction by another student of the same teacher. As the Buddha taught, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. Here we discover that even the most profound teachings are simply tools for awakening, not ultimate truths to be grasped and defended. Why do we cling so tightly to particular formulations of truth when reality itself transcends all concepts? Zen Buddhism reveals that our attachment to specific teachings, no matter how profound, can become obstacles to the very understanding those teachings were meant to inspire. The hermit's confusion points to a fundamental aspect of Zen instruction. Masters often use contradictory teachings to prevent students from turning insights into rigid beliefs. The purpose isn't to provide a final answer, but to exhaust the mind's tendency to grasp and conceptualize, creating space for direct realization beyond all words and ideas. Both teachings, Buddha is your mind and Buddha is not your mind, serve important functions depending on the student's needs and understanding. For someone lost in external seeking, Buddha is your mind redirects attention inward. For someone attached to the idea of possessing Buddha nature, Buddha is not your mind dissolves that subtle grasping. Consider your own relationship with spiritual or philosophical teachings. How often do you turn helpful pointers into absolute truths that must be defended against contradictory perspectives? The hermit's 20-year retreat, while dedicated and sincere, demonstrates how even correct understanding can become a form of limitation when held too rigidly. In Zen practice, we learn to hold all teachings lightly, like medicine that serves its purpose and then is no longer needed. The master's apparent contradiction wasn't inconsistency, but skillful means, using whatever approach would most effectively dissolve each student's particular form of confusion. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The hermit had become so invested in thinking about the teaching that he may have lost touch with the direct experience it was meant to indicate. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching applies even to the Buddha's own words and the most revered Zen teachings. Truth isn't found in the perfect formulation, but in the awakening that transcends all formulations. Look deeply at your own cherished beliefs and understandings. Where might you be holding on to insights so tightly that they've become barriers to deeper realization? What would it mean to receive all teachings as provisional tools rather than final truths? Tonight, as you consider the various teachings and philosophies that have shaped your understanding, can you remember the hermit's surprise at discovering contradiction where he expected confirmation? Can you hold your most treasured insights lightly enough that they remain alive and functional rather than becoming rigid dogma? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, truth has no form, how can it be held? Whether Buddha is your mind or not your mind, whether teachings are correct or incorrect, the reality they point toward remains free of all concepts, available in this moment to anyone willing to look beyond the finger to see the moon itself. As we bring our time to a close tonight, just notice the feeling of quiet inside you. This peace you're feeling isn't something you had to find. It has always been a part of you, just waiting for you to notice. The deep stillness from our stories isn't just in the words. It's right here with you in this present moment. The Buddha once said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." Think about what this means. The peace we look for doesn't come from the outside world. We grow it right inside our own minds, and we can find it any time we just breathe. Every story tonight gently pointed to the same simple ideas. That we feel better when we stop struggling against things. That we find freedom when we let go. And that real peace comes from seeing things clearly, just as they are. And if your mind wandered, that's completely okay. The feeling from these stories has already found a place in your mind and will be there to support you. Now, as you get ready to sleep, remember that these stories weren't showing you a new place to go, but a new way to be, simply by paying attention. In the quiet moments that follow, just rest. Feel your own easy breath and the comfortable stillness in your body. You don't need to do anything at all. You are already where you need to be. This reminds us that you don't have to look for wisdom in special places. It appears whenever you simply pay attention to your own life. Tonight, you practice doing just that. As you drift off, carry this feeling of calm with you. Let it be a quiet, steadying presence in your days to come, helping you through good times and challenging ones. May this peace always be with you. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.